What difference will it make if Balewa is found alive?
I would very much wish that he's found alive, very much so. But there is no doubt that his weakness in controlling his ministers is partially responsible for the present situation. Take the Western region situation, for example. His government refused to act, even though people are being killed daily and life and property are becoming unsafe. He refused to act.
So you wouldn't expect people to want him to get his old job back?
I wouldn't want him to get it back. And I know millions of Nigerians wouldn't. Because we want Nigeria to stay united, prosperous, and great.
6 months after Major General Aguiyi-Ironsi took power as the head of states of Nigeria and also announced the unification decree, the country had been in great chaos, especially the northern part of Nigeria, all because they didn't like the idea of the unification decree and that the General coup plotters, who were mostly Igbo officers, had not been tried for treason and were being paid while in detention. This also made the Northerners see the coup as an Igbo plot, since the Premier of the Eastern region, Michael Opara, the Governor General of Nigeria, Nnamdi Azikiwe, and Major General Aguiyi-Ironsi, who was the Army's GOC during the General coup, all of which were of Igbo ethnicity, were not killed during the coup. But premiers from the western and northern part of the country were killed. Even the Prime Minister of Nigeria, Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, who was from the north, wasn't spared. Despite the murders of Tafawa Balewa and Ahmadu Bello, the northern soldiers were more angry at the deaths of their respected senior officers whom they looked up to, like Colonel Col Muhammed, Brigadier Mamilari, Lieutenant Colonel Agbogola Giman, and Lieutenant Colonel James Palm, who were killed during the General coup. Ironsi's first act as the head of state was to appoint military governors in all 4 regions of the country. From the west, he appointed Lieutenant Colonel Adekunle Fajuyi. From the east, he appointed Lieutenant Colonel Chukwuemeka Ojukwu, who was the former commanding officer of the 5th Battalion in Kano. Lieutenant Colonel David Ejo was appointed as the governor of the Midwest region, while Lieutenant Colonel Hassan Kastina was appointed as the military governor of the North. In an effort to prove that he was not heading an Igbo regime, Ironsi had with great courage entrusted his personal security to northern soldiers. He appointed Lieutenant Colonel Yakubu Gowon as his army chief of staff. Lieutenants William Swobi, who commanded his personal escort, including Major Yakubu Danjuma, Titus Newman, and Sani Bello. One of his ADCs was the younger brother of Lieutenant Colonel James Palm, who had been murdered during the General coup. By surrounding himself with northern soldiers, Ironsi sealed his own fate. The Ibadan-based 1st Battalion, which was mainly composed of northern soldiers, were particularly angry and hot after losing its current and former commanding officers during the General coup. The anger increased when the Igbo deputy commander, Major Nze Fili, took command of the battalion following Lagiman's death. Ironsi was forced to replace Nze Fili with a northern chief officer, Major Joe Akaha, when the northern officers refused to take orders from Nze Fili. The same scenario was played out in the Kano-based 5th Battalion, where the Kanuri Muhammad Shua was appointed to replace Major David Okafor. Despite these attempts by Ironsi to pacify them, northern soldiers were not happy, and many openly voiced their intention to gain revenge for the killings of their northern brothers in January. Even the newly appointed Inspector of Signals, Lieutenant Col Murtala Muhammed, ably assisted by Major Martin Adamu and Theophilus Danjuma, all 3 were under 30 years old. In an unguided eruption in the presence of Igbo officers, Murtala Muhammed referred to Ironsi as a fool and made it clear that he would avenge the deaths of his northern colleagues. For fear of increasing tension in the country, the government had made no official announcement on the fate of the soldiers who had been killed in January. There were also rumors and conspiracy theories about their whereabouts, and miraculous manners of their death and survival thrived. The rumors were so rampant that most of the northern soldiers believed that Mamilari had made a miraculous escape from the January majors and was still alive. But these rumors had tiny appearances of truth, because at the 9th of the January coup in Lagos, he managed to escape from the first attempt to arrest him by Major Don Okafor by jumping over a wall behind his house. But as he was escaping on foot, he came across the car of his brigade major, Imana Ifajuna. Mamilari recognized Ifajuna and did not realize that Ifajuna was part of the coup plot. Believing that Ifajuna could be trusted, Mamilari waved down the car, and immediately he was shot dead by Ifajuna. A riot almost broke out when an attempt was made to replace Brigadier Mamilari's commanding officer nameplate at the 2nd Brigade headquarters in Lagos. The de facto leader and co-coordinator of the revenge coup was the Inspector of Signals, Lieutenant Colonel Murtala Muhammed. Having finalized arrangements for their coup, northern officers twice postponed it, partly because the coup leader feared that the plot had been leaked to Igbo officers who were ready and waiting. An opportunity arose when the head of state, Major General Aguiyi-Ironsi, decided to undertake a nationwide tour. On the first leg of this tour, gunshots were heard while Ironsi was at the Kaduna Airport. All thanks to the Emir of Kano for his personal intervention to resolve the situation. Northern traditional rulers had cautioned against spilling Ironsi's blood on the northern soil. But the northern soldiers decided to deal with Ironsi when he arrived in Ibadan for the western leg of his nationwide tour. The outburst of this commotion started with the soldiers at the Abeokuta Garrison. On Thursday, July 28, 1966, almost midnight, the commanding officer of the Abeokuta Garrison, Lieutenant Colonel Gabriel Okunweze, became concerned by the reports he had received, which indicated that another coup was about to happen. He had received a tip from the army headquarters warning him of a coup that night. Being eager to prevent a recurrence of the killings that had occurred in January, Okunweze instructed Lieutenant Abdullahi Maman to wake up the officers and called a meeting in the officers' mess. Okunweze then urged any officer with information to come forward and promised that he would not report anyone for doing so. He also added that he did not want a repeat of the January shootings and that the best solution would be to issue arms and ammunition to the soldiers in his unit so they could defend themselves if a coup began. In response to Okunweze's order, an Igbo NCO went around waking up other soldiers with instructions for them to go and collect arms. The fact that the NCO was Igbo did not help to calm the fears of northern soldiers. Rather than easing tensions, the meeting further agitated junior northern NCOs who were not inside the mess. Some of the NCOs had already planned a mutiny and assumed that the meeting with Okunweze was discussing plans to eliminate them. Two Bachama soldiers in the unit, Sergeant Sabokwale and Corporal Miasumari Maje, who were natives of Adamawa State, had a crucial conversation in their native tongue. Kwale told Maje to ensure that the weapons were issued to northern soldiers only. While the meeting with the officers was ongoing, northern NCOs led by Sergeant Sabokwale and Corporal Miasumari Maje started advancing towards the mess. The officers in the mess initially thought that the NCOs were coming to receive instructions and did not realize that they were about to become eyewitnesses to a crime scene, led by Sergeant Kwale and Corporal Maje. The northern soldiers burst into the officers' mess and shot dead Lieutenant Colonel Okunweze and the commander of the risk squadron in Abeokuta, Major John Obienu. Obienu had been billed to take part in the January coup, but refused to show up on the day of the coup due to his loyalty to Major General Aguiyi-Ironsi. After the shooting of Okunweze and Obienu, a riot broke out as soldiers started running for cover in all directions. Initially, no one was sure which side was responsible for the shootings, if it was the Igbo soldiers or northern soldiers. Lieutenant Orok, who was an eastern soldier of non-Igbo origin, was also shot dead after driving into the garrison and stumbling on the commotion that was happening. Shortly afterwards, Captain Duncan Bali and Captain Remawa arrived at the garrison and was shocked to discover the corpse of Lieutenant Orok and the other officers who had been killed. They quickly got changed into full battle attire and tried to restrain the NCOs. However, not even the presence of the northern officers, such as Remawa and Bali, could restrain the violent behavior of the NCOs. Second Lieutenant Onania was shot dead in the presence of Captain Bali, who had promised him safe passage. As Bali was escorting him, Olania was shot dead by other northern soldiers. He died calling out Bali's name. Now in control of the Abeokuta Garrison, northern soldiers conducted a door-to-door search for Igbo soldiers. When found, the Igbo soldiers were shot dead and their bodies were dumped into a vehicle parked near one of the officers' quarters. If this is your first time here, please do all to subscribe. Thank you. Lieutenant Roland Ogbonna, who had gone out to celebrate his purchase of his new car, arrived at the garrison and stumbled upon the chaos. Panic-stricken, Ogbonna managed to find his way to a police station, from where he telephoned Lagos to inform the 2nd Battalion of what he assumed was an isolated mutiny in the Abeokuta Garrison. Unfortunately, Ogbonna's call was answered by Lieutenant Nuhu Nathan, who was part of the coup plot. His call merely served as a rallying call for other northern troops who were unaware that the coup had begun to mobilize. Lieutenant Nuhu Nathan then alerted the coup leaders, Lieutenant Colonel Murtala Muhammed and Major Martin Adamu, of what had happened at the Abeokuta Garrison. Hearing this, Murtala Muhammed was initially reluctant and unsure whether the event at Abeokuta justified reigniting the counter coup plan. However, he decided that the Abeokuta mutiny created ideal conditions to restart the original plan for the revenge. He ordered 2 separate groups of the Abeokuta mutineers under Lieutenant D.S. Abubakar and Pawan Khan to head out from Abeokuta to provide reinforcement for their co-conspirators in Lagos and Ibadan, respectively. Lieutenant Colonel Murtala Muhammed then woke up Captain Jogaba of the Federal Guard and told him to adjust to the urgent situation created by the event at Abeokuta. He then departed to mobilize other northern soldiers in Lagos, while Gaba in turn woke up his Federal Guard colleague, Lieutenant Paul Tafa. As Captain Jogaba and his colleague were getting changed and preparing to mobilize the Federal Guards, a call came in from Lieutenant Colonel Yakubu Gowon, confirming news of the event at Abeokuta and urging them to be on alert. In Lagos, a group of Abeokuta mutineers arrived at the 2nd Battalion in Ikeja by early morning on 29th of July to escalate an already heated situation. The coup in Ikeja was initiated by Lieutenant Nuhu Nathan and Lieutenant M.M. Nasarawa, who managed affairs until their superiors like Lieutenant Colonel Murtala Muhammed and Major Martin Adamu had arrived. Other active members of the coup in Lagos were Lieutenant Muhammad Buhari of the 2nd Brigade Transport Company, Lieutenant John Lugbohem, Captain Ibrahim Taiwo, and a notoriously violent soldier from the Idoma ethnic group, Sergeant Paul Dixon. Many Igbo officers were shot dead in their quarters. Some were shot as they reported in the morning for their physical training. The northern soldiers had pre-selected Igbo soldiers for elimination. Captain John Chukwueke, who was the unit educational officer in Ikeja, was shot dead in the presence of his wife, children, and mother-in-law. Lieutenant Gosin Mbabie and his wife were both shot, along with Mbabie's brother-in-law, who was a schoolboy. Luckily, Mbabie's wife survived her injuries. The Ikeja Airport in Lagos turned into an execution ground under the command of the dreadful Sergeant Paul Dixon. Captain Okoye, who was from Ojuku's hometown in Nnewi, was reportedly passing through the Ikeja Airport before being arrested by the soldiers. He was tied to an iron cross and was beaten and left to die an agonizing death in the guardroom. Other Igbo survivors who were captured at the airport, both military and civilians, were flogged on Dixon's order. As it turns out, many Igbo officers who were killed in Lagos were the same officers who played key roles in putting down the January coup. The house of the 2nd Battalion's commander, Lieutenant Colonel Henry Iboba, was also targeted, even though he was one of the officers that participated in putting down the January coup. Northern soldiers surrounded Iboba's house, but he managed to escape and shelter at the police college in Ikeja. In Ibadan, the troops under the command of Major Yakubu Danjuma, whom Aguiyi-Ironsi had recently promoted, surrounded the State House where the Supreme Commander, Major General Aguiyi-Ironsi, the military governor of the Western Region, Lieutenant Colonel Francis Fajuyi, and the 2nd Brigade Commander, Lieutenant Colonel Hilary Njoku, were all located. Prior to that time, Ironsi had received a telephone call from the Commissioner of Police, Joseph Adeola, in the early hours of Friday, 29th of July, informing him of the mutiny at Abeokuta and the murders of Okunweze, Obieno, and Orok. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Fajuyi had suggested that they should leave the State House in Ibadan, but Ironsi refused. Encouraged by the outcome in Abeokuta, approximately 2 dozens of northern soldiers, under the command of Major T.Y. Danjuma, turned up at the Ibadan State House. Danjuma asked all the guards on duty to line up. He disarmed them, then ordered all the Igbo guards to leave, but picked out northern guards to remain. After being briefed by Danjuma, the northern guards switched sides and joined him and the troops he brought along with him. According to Danjuma, by sheer coincidence, Lieutenant Colonel Yakubu Gowon placed a call to the State House at that very moment. The call connected to a telephone immediately adjacent to Danjuma's location. Danjuma picked up the receiver, and after identifying himself, he informed Gowon of his plans to capture Ironsi. Hello, I want to speak to the brigade commander. I want to speak to Colonel Njoku. May I know who is speaking? My name is Gowon, Yakubu Gowon. Ranka Dede, this is Yakubu Danjuma. Yakubu, what are you doing there? Where are you? I'm in the State House here. Where is the brigade commander? He is not around. Have you heard what happened at the Abeokuta Garrison? Yes, I heard, and that's why I'm here. We're about to arrest the Supreme Commander. The alternative is that the Igbo boys who carried out the January coup will be released tit for tat, since we've killed their own officers. Can you do it? Yes, we've got the place surrounded. Alright, but for goodness sake, we've had enough bloodshed. There must be no bloodshed. No, we are only going to arrest him. Around 5 a.m., Aguiyi-Ironsi and his fellow occupants inside the State House heard a gunshot outside. This was actually an accidental discharge by Danjuma's men. Lieutenant Colonel Hilary Njoku, who was the then commander of the 2nd Brigade in Lagos, was summoned from a guest house adjacent to the State House. When he arrived, he found Aguiyi-Ironsi and Fajuyi nervously pacing up and down the living room floor. He was informed about the murders of Okunweze, Obieno, and Orok, and was instructed to travel to Lagos and organize the suppression of the mutiny from there. Before Njoku departed, he telephoned the commander of the 1st Battalion in Ibadan, Lieutenant Colonel Joe Akaha. Akaha was already aware of the event at Abeokuta, but informed Njoku that nothing unusual was occurring in his unit. The military governor of the Midwest region, Lieutenant Colonel David Ejo, also telephoned Akaha and asked him for an update on the situation in Ibadan and to check on Aguiyi-Ironsi's condition. Lieutenant Colonel Joe Akaha still perpetrated that nothing unusual was happening and that his unit was quiet. In fact, the soldiers from Akaha's unit were completely involved in the plot, and many of them were among the soldiers that surrounded Aguiyi-Ironsi and Fajuyi at the State House. As Njoku was leaving the State House, he was recognized by the northern troops outside and they opened fire on him. Njoku was shot in the thigh but managed to escape. Danjuma's men searched the grounds for Njoku but were unable to locate him. He managed to escape for a second time when some northern soldiers went looking for him at a hospital where he sought medical treatment for the gunshot wound he had sustained. Njoku managed to escape his pursuers again and was eventually smuggled to the eastern region. Back at the State House in Ibadan, aides were quietly being arrested by the mutineers. Detainees included the Secretary to the National Military Government, Mr. S.O.W., Staff Sergeant Godwin Madu, Njoku's personal driver, and Major Thomas of the Medical Corps. Having been in position outside the State House for several hours, the NCOs under Danjuma grew increasingly nervous, impatient, and were urging him to attack the building and destroy it with a high-caliber weapon. They were more concerned about the mythical stories of Aguiyi-Ironsi and feared that he could use black magic to make himself disappear from the building and appear at a different location from where he could neutralize the coup. Lieutenant Abdullahi Shelling, on the other hand, urged the NCOs to continue to cooperate with Danjuma. Ironsi and Fajuyi then sent out various aides from the State House to assess what was going on outside. Being aware of the coup plot, these men did not alert Ironsi and Fajuyi of the danger they were in. Fajuyi's ADC, Lieutenant Umar, went out, discussed with Danjuma's troops, and returned to forcefully inform them that all was well. Aguiyi-Ironsi's Air Force ADC, Lieutenant Andrew Nwankwo, also went outside to see what was going on, but was delayed by Major Danjuma, who asked to see Aguiyi-Ironsi. Danjuma and Nwankwo knew each other personally. According to Nwankwo, Danjuma pretended he did not know what was happening. While I was trying to go back, one sergeant from Benue almost shot me, but Danjuma stopped him and spoke to him in Hausa. Danjuma later told me that he would like to see Ironsi so that I could tell him what to do. Aguiyi-Ironsi and Fajuyi became more concerned. Some of the aides they had sent to investigate what was going on outside had simply disappeared and not returned. After some time, Lieutenant Colonel Fajuyi also came outside to see what was taking Nwankwo so long. At this point, Danjuma ordered the arrest of Fajuyi and Nwankwo. "Sir, you're under arrest. Raise your hands." "What do you want?" "I want the Supreme Commander. Promise me that no harm will come to him." Fajuyi agreed to take Danjuma to see Aguiyi-Ironsi after obtaining an assurance from Danjuma that Ironsi will come to no harm. According to Danjuma, he rejected a chorus of objections from the NCOs who did not want Fajuyi to be allowed to go back inside the State House. The NCO agreed only after approximately half a dozen of them were allowed to enter with Fajuyi and Danjuma. While these conversations went on outside, Aguiyi-Ironsi woke up his young son Thomas, who was visiting him from England during his school holidays. He gave Thomas instructions to find his way back to Lagos, embraced and bade farewell to him, then hid him inside a wardrobe. Fajuyi's younger brother was also hidden in the house as the mutineers entered. Danjuma and his troops entered the State House. He walked behind Fajuyi with a grenade in his hand, with the pin removed. Danjuma originally brought the grenade as insurance in case the operation failed and he needed to kill himself. They met two police guards on the staircase and were told to drop their weapons and join the other detainees. Danjuma and his men went up to the first floor and entered the State House living room where Aguiyi-Ironsi was. He saluted Aguiyi-Ironsi, and Lieutenant Titus Newman snatched the crocodile staff away from him. According to the myth, it was said that Aguiyi-Ironsi uses the staff for protection. "Sir, you are under arrest. What is the matter?" "The matter is you, sir. You told us in January when we supported you to subdue the mutiny that all the dissident elements that took part in the mutiny will be court-martialed. It is July now, you have done nothing. You kept these boys in prison, and the rumors are now that they will be released because they are national heroes. Look, what do you mean? It's not true. You are lying. You've been fooling us. You told us that they will be trialed. This is July, and nothing has been done. You will answer for your action." As Danjuma and Aguiyi-Ironsi argued, Lieutenant Colonel Fajuyi repeatedly reminded Danjuma of the assurance of safety he had given. Aguiyi-Ironsi's Air Force ADC, Lieutenant Nwankwo, had his pistol with him but did not use it, as there were half a dozen northern soldiers in the room, armed with automatic weapons and one with a grenade. Lieutenant Sani Bello, who was Aguiyi-Ironsi's ADC, was also detained. As a northerner, he was suspected of being a traitor for serving as Ironsi's army ADC. Aguiyi-Ironsi, Lieutenant Colonel Francis Fajuyi, Nwankwo and Bello were led out to their arms tied behind their back with a telephone wire. Ironsi had his shirt stripped off and his Major General pips were taken away from him. This may have been a symbolic attempt to strip him of his authority. They were loaded into a jeep and driven off in a convoy that included 2 other vehicles. Major Danjuma did not accompany the vehicle, but instead departed for Lagos. Present in the convoy were Lieutenant William Swobi, Gaba Dada, Titus Newman, Abdullahi Shelling, Warrant Officer Aibaka, Sergeant Tijani, and Sergeant Major Hussein Ifeji. The captives were stripped down to their trousers, whipped and badly beaten. Aguiyi-Ironsi and Fajuyi took the brunt of the beatings. As the beating continued, the captors interrogated Aguiyi-Ironsi about his knowledge of the January coup and the whereabouts of the men who had been killed in January. Some of the northern soldiers accused Aguiyi-Ironsi of knowing the whereabouts of Brigadier Mamulari, whom they believed was still alive. After denying any involvement in the January coup, Aguiyi-Ironsi switched off and endured the blows that were being rained down on him in silence, and refused to admit any involvement in the January coup or to answer any further questions that were being fired at him by the junior officers. As an old-school soldier, he showed immense courage in the circumstances and probably felt that would be dishonorable for him as the head of state of the armed forces to allow himself to be interrogated by junior officers. Ironsi and Fajuyi were so badly beaten that they could hardly stand. They were led out into the bush where they were killed by a few rounds of machine gun fire. Captain Nwankwo managed to escape as his captors' attention were focused on Ironsi and Fajuyi. The deaths of Ironsi and Fajuyi were not officially announced for 6 months, and during the 10 days of August 1966, the military governor of the Eastern region, Lieutenant Colonel Chukwuemeka Ojukwu, repeatedly asked Gowon, "Where is the Supreme Commander?" Back at Letmauck Barracks in Ibadan, the commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel July lost control. The soldiers and murdered Aguiyi-Ironsi and Fajuyi returned to the barracks and joined their colleagues to round up Igbo soldiers and lock them up in the guard room. They were now reinforced by the groups of mutineers from Abeokuta that arrived earlier in the day with Lieutenant Nwankwo. A northern soldier from Maiduguri was allegedly seen joyfully walking around the barracks with Aguiyi-Ironsi's crocodile staff. Some southern members of Aguiyi-Ironsi's supporters that had been arrested outside the State House in Ibadan were also taken to the battalion for detention. In the chaos and atmosphere of jungle justice, the Cameroonian Major Hans Anogo was bundled in with Igbo detainees. Anogo was released when one northern soldier recognized that he was not Igbo. The other Igbo army detainees were killed when grenades were tossed into their guard room by northern soldiers. The Igbo casualties in Ibadan included the unit's former adjutant captain, Tommy Wanya, and Lieutenant Eleazar Achebe. The victims' bodies were then hauled onto jeeps. Lieutenant Colonel Yakubu Gowon rang the battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Jaka, during the late afternoon to request Aguiyi-Ironsi's whereabouts. Aka forwarded Gowon's inquiry to Danjuma, who replied that he arrested Aguiyi-Ironsi but lost him to the soldiers from Aka's unit. Danjuma then gave Aka the culprit's name, and Aka passed the names on to Gowon. Back in Lagos, in less than 24 hours, northern soldiers had managed to seize control of all military units in Lagos. The Federal Guards were now in control of Captain Jogaba and his troops, while the airport was in the control of northern soldiers, and a larger concentration of northern troops were also in control at the 2nd Battalion in Ikeja Cantonment. Brigadier Ogundipe could not rely on or trust the regular troops of the 3 army units in Lagos. The Federal Guards and 2nd Battalion were already in control by the mutineers, and the LGO was the only unit not totally in control of the mutineers. Ogundipe therefore sent a platoon of troops under the command of Captain Ifrem Opara of the LGO to recapture the airport. Most of these troops were non-combat soldiers such as clerks, marching band members, and drivers that were not used to handling firearms on a regular basis. They stood no chance against the heavily armed and mutinous northern infantrymen who knew they were coming and laid in wait for them. They were ambushed on Ikorodu Road, routed and took heavy casualties at the hands of northern soldiers who had been expecting them. Some civilians were killed in the crossfire, including Mr. I.O. Wood, a British national who worked as a manager of a shoe factory in Ikeja. The survivors, such as Corporal Ada, tore off their uniform and fled back to base chastened. Further attempts by Ogundipe to send reinforcements failed, as firstly, both Captain Jogaba, who was among the mutineers, and Lieutenant Colonel Rudy Trimner refused to go. The unprepared troops he eventually managed to gather up simply drove around Lagos and returned back to base without firing a shot. Lieutenant Colonel Murtala Muhammed sent Lieutenant D.S. Abubakar's group of Abeokuta mutineers to the LGO Abauti Barracks to suppress further counterattack by the LGO. When they got to the barrack, they liquidated several Igbo NCOs. The theory that the counter coup was prematurely triggered by events in Abeokuta is supported by the fact that nothing happened in the northern region until 24 hours after the murders of Okunweze, Obienu and Orok at Abeokuta. It seems that the northern troops stationed in the northern region were not willing to make their move until they were certain of the outcome of the revolt in the south. They may have been mindful of what happened in January when Aguiyi-Ironsi managed to escape, put down the major school, and have them locked up. After hearing what happened in the south, the Igbo commander of the Kaduna-based 3rd Battalion, Lieutenant Colonel Israel Okoro, believed that he could diffuse the situation through dialogue. He addressed his troops during the afternoon of July 29th. His men assured him of their loyalty, and Okoro naively dropped his guard. He was no longer commanding a battalion under conditions of normal honesty and military discipline. His appeal for loyalty unintentionally served as a foundation for the extension of the mutiny to the northern region. Late in the day, Okoro's RSM, Amadu Bello, a northerner, informed him that he was required in the guard room. When Okoro arrived for the non-existent assignment, he was questioned and then shot by 2 of his northern troops. The Eastern Region's report of the coup claimed that the soldiers who shot Okoro dead were Lieutenant Yakubu Dambo and Buka Suka Dimka. After Okoro's death, northern soldiers rounded up and arrested their Igbo colleagues and held private trials during which the Igbo soldiers were sentenced to death and killed. Same day after Okoro's murder, an alarm was sounded for a battalion military parade. When soldiers showed up for the parade, Igbo soldiers were separated and rounded up into trucks. They were then driven out onto the Kaduna-Jos Road and shot dead. Deception played a large part in the murders of Igbo soldiers. A consistent pattern emerged whereby northern soldiers would sound an alarm, disarm and then divide and murder Igbo soldiers when they came to answer the alarm. The commander of the 2nd Raid Squadron, Major Upo Isiong, an eastern officer of non-Igbo origin, was also killed. Isiong had succeeded Hassan Kastina as the squadron commander only 6 months earlier. 2 non-Igbo eastern officers, 2nd Lieutenant Patrick Ibig and Dagwaribo, that took part in the January coup were also killed. As direct participants in the January coup, their names would have been at the top of the death list.
One of the greatest commercial cities in northern Nigeria is Kano, capital of the province of that name. At almost any time of the day, you will see laden camels plodding along the roads, bringing produce to the market or taking it to the railhead for transport to Lagos.
In Kano, there was no immediate bloodshed for two reasons. Firstly, because the 5th Battalion was commanded by a Northerner, Lieutenant Colonel Mohammed Shoa, who was very disciplined and non-confrontational. In this way, Northern soldiers did not have to forcibly take control over them. Secondly, when Lieutenant Colonel Yakubu Gowon telephoned the battalion early on Monday of July 29th to break the news of the Abeokuta mutiny, Lieutenant Colonel Mohammed Shoa had not arrived in office, so the call was received by the battalion second-in-command, Major James Oluloye, who was from the Western region. Oluloye immediately called his company commanders, told them to lock the armory and to hand over the armory keys to him. He locked all the armory keys in his combination safe. By the time the news of the event at Abeokuta filtered through to the rest of the battalion, it was too late for them to do anything as the armory was sealed. Therefore, denying them access to weapons, the troops were ordered to remain in the barracks. However, in October 1966, Lieutenant Colonel Mohammed Shoa lost control of his own troops, who revolted and joined civilian mobs in murdering and terrorizing Igbo civilians. Such was the chaos that forced Shoa to flee for his own safety. A coup in the eastern region and the elimination of his military governor, Lieutenant Colonel Chukwuemeka Ojukwu, was also planned. Captain Baba Usman of military intelligence had been tasked with coordinating the mutiny with the 1st Battalion. It was in the eastern market town of Aba when the news and timing of the Abeokuta mutiny caught him by surprise. However, the planned mutiny in Enugu was prevented, firstly, by one of Lieutenant Ogbona's distress call from Abeokuta, and secondly, by the outstanding leadership of the veteran commander of the Enugu-based 1st Battalion, Lieutenant Colonel David Ogundipe. Ogbona's call to the battalion came early enough to alert Ogundipe of what was going on. By the time northern officers called their colleagues in Enugu to swing into action there, Ogundipe had already been forewarned. He had been posted to the battalion during the redeployments that followed the January coup. He found northern soldiers in his battalion, including Captain Gibson Jallo, Lieutenant Shehu Musa Yaradua, MD Jega, and AA Abubakar, all dressed in combat uniform and readying themselves to commence an assault in Enugu. Using all his persuasive power, he managed to convince them to hand over the armory keys and negotiated a tense but effective arrangement with the northern soldiers. He also locked his battalion's armory, placed it under the joint guard of unarmed northern and southern officers, and encouraged northern and southern soldiers to live together in the mess and grounds of the battalion. Ogundipe was the only officer authorized to carry a weapon. This way, neither of the groups could make a sneaky move against another. Surrounded by a hostile population, the northern officers were content to their agreement in order to avoid risking their families' lives, but were firm in their determination to defend themselves if the need arises. However, Lieutenant Colonel Chukwuemeka Ojukwu, the military governor of the eastern region, was not taking chances with his safety. He correctly suspected that he has been marked for elimination by the northern soldiers in Enugu, and he left the State House to take refuge at the regional police headquarters. As in January, the coup did not take off in the eastern region or Midwest region where no troops were stationed. Ojukwu feared that the northern troops at Enugu could mutiny at any time, and he demanded that they should be moved away from Enugu. Ojukwu's caution was wise. Lieutenant Colonel Murtala Muhammed repeatedly sent signals for northern soldiers in Enugu to extend the mutiny to the eastern region. Some northern soldiers attempted to break into the Enugu armory but were overpowered. The failure of the coup in the eastern region created a stalemate similar to the one that existed in January 1966, when Nzogu was in control of the northern region, while Aguiyi-Ironsi had the south. This time, the counter coup has succeeded in every region other than the eastern region. As in January, there was no shooting in the Midwest region as it had no permanent military base. The northern soldiers in the region were members of the security detail of Lieutenant Colonel David Ejo, the region's military governor. Nonetheless, Ejo was sufficiently concerned that he called out and addressed his men, urging them not to shed any blood. Ejo claimed that he pleaded with his northern soldiers that if they wanted to kill anyone, they should kill him alone and leave all the others unharmed. Aguiyi-Ironsi's deputy, Brigadier Babafemi Ogundipe, a kind and polite Yoruba officer with no political ambition, was now the most senior surviving officer in the army. Before the UK handed over command of the Nigerian army to indigenous soldiers in 1965, the outgoing GOC, Major General Webley Everard, had recommended Ogundipe as his replacement without success. However, this was a situation beyond Ogundipe's military capabilities, and he could not declare his authority over the northern troops. On Friday afternoon of July 29, 1966, Ogundipe made a broadcast to the nation on Radio Nigeria. The message, which was repeated from 2:30 p.m. onwards for the rest of the day, stated that, as a result of some trouble by the dissidents in the army, mainly in Ibadan, Abeokuta and Ikeja, the national military government has declared a state of emergency in the affected areas. Consequently, the following areas have been declared military areas under the Suppression of Disorder Decree of 1966: Ibadan, Ikeja and Abeokuta. Military tribunals have been considered and accordingly set up. Curfew has been declared in the affected areas from 6:30 p.m. The national military government wishes to state that the situation is under control and hopes to restore peace and tranquility very soon. The government appeals to the public for cooperation in its effort to restore law and order in the affected areas. However, the situation was anything but tranquil and was deteriorating rapidly out of control. The Ikeja cantonment became the undeclared headquarters of the mutineers, and the frustrated Ogundipe sent Lieutenant Colonel Yakubu Gowon to go there and talk to them. When Gowon arrived, it appears that he was not a free agent and was placed under guard. There he found out that the leading figures were northern officers stationed in Lagos. The military governor of the eastern region, Lieutenant Colonel Chukwuemeka Ojukwu, was not initially contacted, but when he managed to reach Ogundipe by telephone, Ogundipe informed him that the northern troops had given their condition for a ceasefire. Firstly, the repatriation of northerners and southerners to their respective regions of origin, and secondly, the secession of the northern region from Nigeria. Ojukwu replied, "If that is what they want, I agree, let them go," and replaced the receiver. At this stage, Ojukwu was willing to accept either the northern region's secession or a continuation of the federation, but the latter choice on the condition that political leadership of Nigeria should follow army seniority. The northern soldiers were uninterested in a continuation of the status quo and wanted the northern region to secede from Nigeria. Secessionist sentiment among the northern troops may have been strengthened by the fear that staying in Nigeria would give Igbos the opportunity to gain revenge for the murders of Aguiyi-Ironsi and other Igbos that they killed, or might increase the prospect of them being tried and punished. During a 3-day debate in Lagos, which was held in Ikeja from July 29th to July 31st, the northern officers were joined by a number of federal secretaries, 2 judges, prominent northern civil servants, and by British and American diplomats who asked the northern soldiers to drop their plans to secede from the Federation. As negotiations continued in Ikeja, the explosive Lieutenant Col Murtala Muhammed was the most vociferous and uncompromising advocate of the northern secession. The civilian participants managed to persuade the northern soldiers to drop their secessionist plan, and their most senior member, Lieutenant Colonel Yakubu Gowon, was appointed as the military head of state. He was the youngest person to become head of state at the age of 31.
As I've said it already, I know it is quite a gigantic task, but I think personally that there is nothing impossible for a young man to do. I think once at least he's got, good level-headedness, good advisors around him, I think he will be able to carry his job quite all right.
As Gowon struggled to stabilize himself in power, random murders of Eastern Region soldiers continued to occur. On August 19, 1966, soldiers from the Ibadan-based 4th Battalion came to Benin for a funeral. After the funeral, the soldiers learned that some of the General Coup plotters were held at a nearby Benin prison. Rather than heading home after the funeral, the soldiers took a detour to the Benin prison, broke into it and raided it, then released northern troops who were detained there for their parts in the General Coup. Igbo officers are also held for the same offense were not spared. 5 of them, including Major Chris Anufuru and Major Don Okafor, were tortured to death. Anufuru was shot dead and Okafor was buried alive. In early August, the Supreme Military Council ordered the repatriation of all army officers to their respective regions of origin. Major Benjamin Adekunle, also known as the Black Scorpion, was the deputy commander of the 1st Battalion in Enugu. When the decision was made to repatriate army officers to their respective regions of origin, Adekunle and northern soldiers in his unit were to leave Enugu and then head firstly to Kaduna and then to Lagos. Simultaneously, a group of surviving Igbo officers that had been detained in Kaduna prison for their own safety were to be repatriated to Enugu through Lagos. When they were released for transportation by train to Enugu, Adekunle promised them safe passage. The northern soldiers in Adekunle's battalion and the Igbo soldiers were placed on the same train. Some of the northern soldiers who had been frustrated at their inability to kill Igbo soldiers finally got their opportunity. They descended upon Igbo soldiers, killed them, and threw their body up the train. Major Benjamin Adekunle was also attacked for promising safe passage to the Igbo soldiers, but was saved by the intervention of Captain Gibson Jallo. In late September 1966, the Kano's 5th Battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Mohammed Shua and Major James Oluleye were posted away from the battalion and replaced with Major Abakari and Captain Aruna. On the afternoon of Saturday, October 1, 1966, the 5th Battalion troops mutiny and opened fire as their commander, Major Abakari, addressed them on the battalion parade ground. The rampaging soldiers were so out of control that even the northerners who tried to restrain them were murdered. They murdered their fellow northern officers, including the second in command, Captain Aruna, and the RSM. Their commanding officer, Major Abakari, and other officers had to flee for their lives and hid off base. The troops raided the battalion's armory, broke out of the barracks, and headed into town to pick up local civilians, whom they asked to take them to locations where they could find the Igbos. The Igbo civilians trying to escape were not spared. Some were killed at the airport, train stations, or even at their homes. This massacre on October 1, 1966 was possibly the worst of the whole mutiny. The participation of soldiers with firearms greatly increased the kill rates. Several thousand Igbos were killed that day alone in Kano due to the combined effort of the 5th Battalion soldiers and the civilian mobs. The military governor of the northern region, Lieutenant Colonel Hassan Katsina, had to travel to Kano to bravely confront the mutineers. He managed to put down the mutiny by driving street to street for several hours in a jeep accompanied by the Emir of Kano. The sight and authority of the Emir shamed the looters into fleeing and the soldiers into returning to their barracks. Aware of the killings in the north, Ojukwu urged all lieutenants to return to the east, and due to concerns of his safety, he refused to attend any meeting held by the Supreme Military Council outside the eastern region. With that, the Supreme Military Council began to suspect that he was planning a secession of the eastern region from the rest of Nigeria. Finally, Lieutenant Colonel Ankara of Ghana decided to host the officers in his territory at Aburi. On January 4th and 5th, 1967, all members of the Supreme Military Council met for the first time in 6 months at Aburi in Ghana. The representatives present at the meeting were the chairman of the SMC, the commander of the Nigerian Navy, military governor of all 4 regions of the country, military governor of Lagos, the Inspector General of Police and his deputy. While the meeting was ongoing, the federal delegation behaved as if the Aburi conference was a social gathering to reunite former friends who had fallen off in a social tiff. However, Ojukwu saw the conference for what it really was, a historic constitutional debate that would determine Nigeria's future. The council collectively vowed not to use force to settle the Nigerian crisis, and that each region would be responsible for its own affairs, and that the federal military government would be responsible for matters that affected the entire country. This agreement would later be known as the Aburi Accords. Afterwards, the officers shook hands as a sign of reconciliation and agreement. But on the 26th of January 1967, Lieutenant Colonel Yakubu Gowon gave a press conference rejecting the Aburi Accord. With that, Ojukwu went on air to announce that if the agreement at Aburi was not fully implemented, and if the eastern region were to be attacked or blockaded, he would have no other option but to secede. The slogan "On Aburi we stand" became the mantra of the entire region. At this point, both parties have already begun to acquire arms. Gowon's response was to impose a blockade on the eastern region in early May. Further went on to declare a state of emergency for the entire nation and announced that he had assumed full powers for the short period necessary to carry out the measures which were now urgently required. He then went on to propose a decree abolishing all regions and dividing Nigeria into 12 states. The eastern region was broken into 3 states, which were the East Central, Rivers, and Southeastern. On the 30th of May 1967, Lieutenant Colonel Chukwuemeka Ojukwu declared the independence of the eastern region, and he renamed it the Independent Republic of Biafra. However, Gowon saw this as an act of rebellion, and on the 6th of July 1967, federal troops commanded by him crossed over the border town of Gakem, a community located in the present-day Cross River State, which was then part of Biafra, and fired the first shot. This act led to the beginning of the Nigerian Civil War, also known as the Biafran War, which lasted for 2.5 years, from July 6, 1967 to January 13, 1970.